Welcome to the South African Film Festival, everyone. And today we are absolutely delighted to be joined by, I guess it's fair to say, a luminary of the South African filmmaking scene. His name is Oliver Schmitz, and I'll introduce you properly to him in a moment. I'm Collins Rex. I'm one of the festival co-directors, and it's my great pleasure to chat to Oliver today. Oliver, of course, a filmmaker, a director, a scriptwriter, and all sorts of things in between. And he has produced some of the most seminal works from South Africa in the last 30 years. Welcome, Oliver, and thanks for joining us all the way from Berlin.
Collins, thank you very much. Nice to be here.
Well, of course, the main reason we're chatting to you today, and of course, it's wonderful to just talk to you in general, but we are particularly thrilled to talk to you because we are featuring one of your key works, I think it's fair to say, Mapantsula, in the festival this year. In fact, it's our closing in cinema screening, and we're really excited about having the film. And certainly all the people that follow us are really excited as well. But it's really interesting because the film has been around for a long time and so few people have actually seen it. So, it's a really great thing to be able to talk to you and get the backstory before people actually have the opportunity to watch the film in select cinemas in Australia and New Zealand at the end of this month. So let's just plunge straight into it, shall we? Mapantsula, I guess it's fair to say, is known for its very authentic portrayal of apartheid-era South Africa, going back to the late 80s. Can you share with us what inspired you to create the film and just how you maintained the storytelling to maintain that very raw authenticity?
Well, it's complicated, but you know, growing up, being born in the 60s, growing up in the 70s and 80s in South Africa, realizing the apartheid society is not a healthy or just one, and feeling as a young person, I don't want to live in a society like this. You know, along the way, we ran a nightclub in Cape Town where we got past the segregation laws. I then had to leave the country because of military call-up. I was not happy about this disjunct in my life and what I saw in my country. So there was a passionate need from my side and from my key collaborators to do something. So it wasn't just a film. It was a call to action, and it was a personal moral stand as well. So a lot of these things came together to make a film which, according to the apartheid authorities, shouldn't have been made back then, and finding a way how to make the film when you weren't actually allowed to make a film like this.
Indeed, and we'll talk in a moment about exactly how you managed to get around that authoritarian state to make a film which, as you've rightly pointed out, they certainly didn't want you to make. But I want to move to your protagonist, to your key character, the character Panic, who is a very complex character. There's not just good or just bad in him. There's various shades of grey, flawed as a human being, but certainly some streaks of heroism in him as well. How did you identify and develop that character? And how did you balance the good guy and the bad guy, both of whom are Panic?
Well, I think the character has a lot to do with the lead actor, Thomas Mokotlane, and getting to know him, befriending him, talking to him. It's his character. It's not him, but it's his character. You know, he's lived it. He's lived that life of, artists were slightly on the outside of the rules always. I think it's in any society, and gangsters to some degree as well. There's a kind of rebelliousness about them. You don't have to approve of everything they do or most of what they do, but there's a rebelliousness which has been romanticized often in films. especially American films in the 40s. And the name Panic is actually from a film noir film called Panic in the Streets. That was Thomas's idea. So, it's the rebel on the outside of society. And this film, we decided to look at a lead which is not obviously a heroic activist person of change story, but somebody who's resisting that and who thinks just of himself. And we thought this was a much more interesting story to tell. There are no clear good, bad scenarios in the world. I believe we're all a mixture of good and bad, and mostly good, and some are mostly bad. But these forces tug at us the whole time, and maybe this is the Catholic in me saying this, but I think it's too simplistic to have a completely angelic hero figure or a completely mad opposite. There were a few nuances. International audiences were surprised at the time that there were black policemen. It didn't fit into their mindset of what South Africa or what it should be. So, we explored various levels of this kind of real people in real situations, if I can say.
Well, of course, just as Panic was both good and bad, hero and anti-hero, so the apartheid regime had good people and bad people on both sides of the color divide and on both sides of the political divide. So, in many ways, I guess the character was emblematic of society in South Africa at the time. But you mentioned, and I think it's quite apparent that this wouldn't have been the easiest film to make at the time. Anyone who has seen the film will understand that it is clearly an indictment of the apartheid regime. How did you manage to get it past the censor board in the first place when it came to submitting the script? Because, of course, all of those things had to be vetted before you could actually start shooting. So how did you get around that? And tell us what happened immediately upon release of the film.
Well, I mean, just to recap the times, South Africa moved from one state of emergency to the next, and what was deemed treason or treasonous was very broad, and that included any call for support of liberation movements, or any support for radical change in South Africa was considered treason. And I know some people went to jail for 5 years for something like that, or were kept in detention. So it was incredibly tough at the time. And I'd worked in documentary as well, and I learned some devious techniques, and I realized there's no ways we can make this film if we say what we're going to do. And I decided we need to write a fake script, and it was a script with the characters, but the main policeman was a gang boss, and there were no politics in the film. And it was a fake script which we handed into the municipalities where we wanted to shoot. It was a fake script which we had in case we needed it for other reasons. It was a fake script also which gave us kind of a cover story, because police came asking, or army units came asking when we were in the townships once, what are you doing here? And the actors were wonderful in sort of spinning a tale, which was not the film. So towards the end of production, the laboratory started noticing if there are riot scenes in this film, what is going on? And then strange men with old-fashioned leather jackets and grey shoes started turning up in the edit suite, saying they were journalists, and it was clear from their dress style and demeanor they were not journalists.
Oh, the security police did have a certain look.
They had a very specific look. Nobody else wore grey shoes, and then we got the negative. I took the negative personally out of the country to Technicolor Lab in London, and there was a demand from the police for the film, and our lawyer said, well, you have to do it. So we sent them a VHS copy, and then we didn't hear for a long time. And we thought, what is going on? And it turned out they lost the copy, and they were too embarrassed to actually admit that they could do something that stupid. Yes. So, but that the film came out and the censor board wanted it to be cut, and there were army and police officials on the censor board, and they had a heart attack. And we didn't want to cut the film, obviously. And there was a rift between me and the Australian producer and the lead actor and our main producer at the time, because he was concerned about making his money back. And I said, we can't do this. So essentially, we let the film in South Africa go out on VHS tapes and be pirated. And that's the way most South Africans over the years have seen that or watched bad YouTube copies. The film did show in Australia and it showed in 52 countries around the world. But that's a long time. We're talking about 36 years ago, 35, 36 years ago. So I realized that if I don't digitize and restore this film, it's going to be lost, unfortunately, to a few scratchy old copies. And negative, that was deteriorating in storage. That's how this whole journey began.
And of course, now it has been restored in 4K, and it really is, it's beautiful insofar as you can describe something set in that time as beautiful, but it's a beautifully shot film. It's a film that it's a cinema buff's film, and the accolades that it's garnered over the years, I think certainly are testament to that. But having it restored, having it back on the big screen, and for many ex-South Africans and South Africans to see it for the first time in that way, in its glory, is a very exciting thing, and something of which you should be rightly proud. And I'm a little bit gobsmacked when I listen to the way that you circumvented the authorities, the way in which you conceived of this film, the way you worked with your co-conspirators, if we like, in the actors and the other people involved in the film. Because Oliver, you were very young when you made Mapantsula. I mean, we're not talking about a 50-year-old with a fully formed life, and you were just a babe in the woods.
I was 27, 28. I was 27 when I was shooting the film, yes.
It's remarkable. And all kudos to you for sticking to your guns through all the intimidation and everything else that you would have faced. And I know we smile about the security police in their bad leather jackets and their grey shoes, but it wouldn't have been a funny thing at the time. It would have been really terrifying for you, yes, and for your cast and your crew as well.
Absolutely. It was no fun. They did terrible things, especially at that time. They were desperate. They were trying to hang on to a system which had obviously failed. And the resistance was so high against it, but the only way they knew how to cope was with extreme violence, which they used. Yeah,
absolutely. And we know that Mapantsula, with its anti-apartheid theme, sort of couched in the gangster world, has very much been recognized as the first film that showed the regime from an insider's perspective and from a Black perspective, whereas everything else was sort of looking from the outside in. This was from the inside looking out, and I think that's part of the power of the film. Did you realize at the time what impact it would have? And looking back, have you achieved that impact today?
I didn't make it primarily for an international audience back then. I thought what was really missing, and this is from growing up and the cultural scene generally, is that film was very bland and restrictive. And having seen some international films on film festivals that had a true radical power, I thought, we need this. We need to see ourselves. We need to tell stories for South Africans, and it doesn't pander to international saleability in any kind of way. There's no white lead actor. There's no Hollywood nudge to Hollywood. It's completely in vernacular. It's the jokes are jokes South Africans will understand. But what I realized that you make a movie which has got enough integrity. One hopes other people will see this as well, and even the context might be foreign to them. It then gains something universal. But the main reason for making this film was for South African audiences, and I think that's why it is still appreciated by generation after generation of young South Africans. I still get feedback, and we released the restored film last year, and we had some township screenings in South Africa this year, and the resonance is very gratifying. So even now, it resonates. So I'm happy. I'm having gone on this journey and having done the restoration. And even doing things which I couldn't do back then, because the grading of the film back then, I was alone with a technician in London. The DOP couldn't come. I didn't have experience in this, so now I could do a grading of the film that I probably would have done back then if I had the knowledge. And we didn't have money for a Dolby license back then, and I did as best as we could a stereo mix of the film now. So there's things in this restoration that weren't possible because of various limits back then. So the film is only actually being completed now, 100%. It's not remaking the film or changing it. It's actually finishing it.
And of course, technology has moved apace in the last 30 plus years too, as well. So you are able to do things today that even if you did have all the resources back then, you simply wouldn't have been able to do because those things didn't exist. And you've mentioned the way that the film still resonates with audiences and the way that it resonated all those years ago with particularly young South Africans. And I was a student at the time when the film was released, and I didn't get to see it in South Africa because I didn't have access to one of those pirated VHS tapes. But having revisited it recently and kind of seeing it again with the eyes that I would have had as a youngster, and thinking, boy, if I'd seen this then, we were so aware of what was going on around us, but much of it was still hidden. And this would have been an enormous eye-opener for many, many young South Africans. But it would also have been an eye-opener for young people and others, but I think particularly for young people all over the world. And that's the legacy that it still has. I think people still watch the film thinking, good Lord, is this the way people actually lived, the way they were forced to live, and the way that they were forced to fight for the most basic human rights? What is the legacy that the film has left, not just for audiences, but for young filmmakers? And we know at the time, Spike Lee, for example, was a great supporter of the film and came out and made some very profound statements about it. But the young filmmakers today, if they watch Mapantsula, what do you want them to take away from that and the way in which they portray the issues in their own lives, their own countries, their own societies today?
Well, I've told filmmakers over the years a few things. I've told them that you should not be intimidated by the fact of starting from a position of zero knowledge. If that is the case and you want to make movies, if you want to make movies and you have a talent to make movies, you'll find a way to tell your stories. And you go to university and do it, or you don't go to university and do it. I studied fine arts. I didn't study filmmaking. I watched movies, as did a lot of French directors in the 60s. They'd watched movies, they critiqued movies. They didn't go and study movie making. So that's the one thing. You learn making movies by watching other movies. And I spoke to a group of students last year, and I said, it's very important to have somebody on this journey with you. To do it alone is a very hard thing. You need somebody to support and be there for you in a real meaningful way. If it's a writer, or if it's a producer, you can't do this journey alone. Yeah, you sit too long in a room on your own, you'll get frustrated and not move forward, or think, oh, maybe I should rewrite this, maybe I should do that. You need somebody who will connect you to the process of taking that film out there in the world and finding resonance so you can make it. And there are thousands of reasons why to say a film won't work or won't happen, but there are 20 good reasons that'll happen in a very unexpected way that it does happen, you know. So it's a weird process. It's frustrating sometimes, but it's wonderful because when it works, it's the greatest thing possible. I mean, those are the two basic things I say to them, and everybody must follow their story. You know, it's essentially about telling stories and using filmmaking as a tool and this huge mysterious technological instrument. There are when I worked on Mapantsula, I had almost zero set experience. So obviously I know this from many years of experience. Teams will smell you out. They'll say, "Oh, he's new. He doesn't know does he know what he's doing?"
He's 27 years old.
And that can be incredibly,
know?
that could be incredibly intimidating. But Thomas, the lead actor, said to me once, "You know what you want, and that's the most important thing." And I think he was right. You need the support of your crew and your cast. You need people to trust you, and you need to do that in return. And if you have a vision, if you have an interesting story, you'll find people who will listen and say, "Oh wow, can we go on that journey with you?"
And here we are, almost 40 years down the track, and people are still listening and still watching, Oliver. And I think that is testament to the vision that you had all those many years ago, and the cast and the crew that stuck with you through those very dangerous times to make what is a truly remarkable film. And we thank you for sharing it with us and for sharing it with the South African Film Festival, and for allowing us to have a whole new generation of Australians and South Africans and others who come to the cinema share in this work of art that you created and set free in the world. So thank you so much. And thank you for joining us today and for sharing some of that backstory, some of it really frightening, some of it actually quite funny, and it has been delightful. Thank you. And we look forward to audiences experiencing the film in that 4K glory on the 30th of May in cinemas around Australia and New Zealand.
Thank you very much. Thank you.